So Kevin, maybe you can share a little bit. What happened in your 30s? This is a very strange occurrence. So tell us the story.
I know, right? Because when you hear about, bone loss and osteopenia and osteoporosis, you're not thinking about a young man, right? You're thinking about your mother or your grandmother or somebody who was hunched over with a cane, worried about their future. That's kind of what people think is osteopenia and osteoporosis. But for me, being a young male that had all these different health issues kind of brewing under the surface for many, many years, having fatigue, high stress, poor sleep, not a lot of energy, not having the best diet and nutrition when I was a kid, having smoked, at a certain point in my life, having consumed alcohol excessively at one point in my life, all those kinds of things can contribute. And then for me, I got to the point where I was having digestive issues, severe digestive issues, and I come to find out I had celiac disease. So I was diagnosed with celiac disease, and shortly thereafter, I was told I had osteoporosis. And osteoporosis, it literally means porous bone, right? So what was happening was celiac disease, for those who aren't familiar, is when you ingest gluten, what happens is it starts to damage your nutrient absorption centers in your body. And those are called villi. They're these tiny little hair-like projections that cover your small intestine, and they help absorb the nutrients from the food you eat. Well, when I was consuming gluten, those nutrient centers, those villi, were being damaged and blunted to the point where I couldn't absorb my nutrients. And because you still need calcium every single day, your body does, to execute its daily functions, my body wasn't getting it and it wasn't absorbing it. So it had to go to my largest mineral reserves in my body, which were my bones. And it started pulling that calcium and those other nutrients from my bones. And that's how I developed osteoporosis in my early 30s. And, a lot of people are shocked when they hear that. I was actually really shocked at that time because, and I was actually really scared too, and my background was, I was a pretty tough kid growing up in Missouri. I worked on a farm as my first job. I went in the Marine Corps. Spent time in the Marine Corps. So I always felt like somebody who was really tough and somebody who could endure a lot. But when I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, single fell swoop, that identity was taken from me, just stripped away.
Wow. How do they even know to check your bone density?
Great question, because a lot of people listening. So let's even just talk about the reason why I was diagnosed with celiac disease. And I ended up having elevated liver enzymes. And all the other doctors that, I was meeting with, nobody said, hey, after we found out I had celiac disease and still had elevated liver enzymes, nobody said, hey, we should get this guy a bone density. And then it was a physician's assistant who asked me one day and just said, hey, have you had a bone density scan done? I think we should do one. And I was like, no, I haven't. And I thought that the results were going to come back, that it was just a check in the box and that my bone density was okay. But it came back that I had osteoporosis.
Why did he ask you that question?
Because he probably knew, or, had thought that I was malabsorbing nutrients for a long time. And he knew the impact that probably was going to have on my bones. And that's actually one of the things now that I recommend to people that are younger with digestive issues, or maybe they had an eating disorder or poor diet and nutrition, or led a sedentary lifestyle when they were younger, or maybe even took medications, certain medications when they were younger, that we get those bone density scans earlier on in life. And that's actually, a bone density scan is also called a DEXA scan, dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. And it's a painless test. It's kind of like an X-ray, very low levels of radiation. You lay down on the machine, it does a scan, and it tells you your bone mineral density, the measure of how much bone you have. And then it generates a score. And that score is called the T-score. And the T-score is telling you how much your bone mass is different from the bone mass of an average healthy 30-year-old adult. If you have a score of +1 or -1, or somewhere in between there, that's normal and healthy. -1 to -2.5, that's considered osteopenia or low bone mass. -2.5 and lower, -2.6, -2.7, so on and so forth, that's considered osteoporosis, right? The greater that negative number becomes, the greater risk of fracture and the lower the bone strength and bone density would be. So Most people are not getting these. Most women, especially, are not getting these until their 50s, their 60s as a check in the box. But in my opinion, that's too late. So the earlier we can get them, just to get a baseline from which to monitor future changes, the better off you're going to be.
Okay. How bad was yours?
I had, at that point in time, I had -3 scores in the negative threes, my lower lumbar. And then the other areas had, some of the other areas I had, just right into the osteoporotic range. And then osteopenia in some other areas too. So it was kind of a mix, and that kind of makes sense. Like in your spine, you have different types of bone in your body, right? So in your spine, you have more trabecular bone. In other areas of your body, you could have more cortical bone. Trabecular bone is more blood and nutrients flow freely through that. Can also be another reason why you may lose bone a little bit quicker in some of those areas that have a higher concentration of trabecular bone too.
So that must be scary. You felt fragile, I guess.
Yeah, I felt fragile. I was completely concerned. I actually remember they didn't even tell me in person. It was a letter that I had gotten in the mail, and it just said, "You've been diagnosed with or you have osteoporosis. Go on a gluten-free diet." That was what I got, and I was like, you know what? I actually remember the blood rushed out of my face, and I was just like, I just felt deflated and really upset. And then I was like, let me go get a second opinion. I got a second opinion. It confirmed the diagnosis. And then I had to start this whole journey.
So